Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahi Tejasvinavaditam Astuma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with a great deal of energy. And may our study be vigorous and fruitful. May we not unnecessarily cover with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So this evening's topic is quite a contemporary topic. It's the topic of evolution. And when we think of evolution, we're normally thinking of biological evolution, not really understanding, of course, other kinds of evolution are present. Cosmological evolution is there. According to the modern standard model in cosmology, we came from something like a big explosion, and from there on, everything evolved. But the ancient people had their own way of understanding this. And if we take this term evolution to mean literally what it is that is unfolding, we'll have a different idea of it than what contemporary evolutionists may have. When Swami Vivekananda dictated his book on Raja Yoga as a commentary on Patanjali Yoga Sutras, he makes a very telling comment on a very important sutra. Sutra, don't forget, Patanjali Yoga Sutras and all the sutra literature. Sutra means a thread. When a surgeon sews you up, he uses a suture, and that comes from this Sanskrit sutra, something like a thread. That means a bare minimum of something is told. You can imagine an environment of students, and so something is told as a headliner, a kind of helicopter view of something to trigger a student's memory about everything you ever discussed under that topic. For example, if we are studying organization and I tell you the well-worn phrase, time is money, and you can actually say T-I-M-E, time is money exactly. And then we discuss why we would say such a thing. That we have time coming through us as a series of unspent opportunities that we can fill in usefully. And there are normal ways in which we waste it, unconscious ways, unknowing ways that we waste the time. In spiritual life, it's very important that we are able to catch this time and use it properly, because whether you believe in reincarnation or not, this next second that you have that's passing right now is the last second, because another second is coming. And when I said second, that one is gone. What did you put into it? And so in terms of thought, seconds are the currency. In terms of activities, minutes are the currency. And how much did you waste? Waste means something that you did that was a diversion to a central purpose in life. Well, first of all, we have to establish, is there a central purpose in life? If there is, even a biological evolution, an unfolding, where we see a series of changes through fossils, and seeing that series of changes, we infer that there is a progression. Is it a meaningless progression? Is there an end to it? Is there a drive toward it? And many biological evolutionists will say today, no, there's no purpose in it. It is just rambling on. And if you ask where did it come from, is there a satisfactory abiogenesis, an origin of it? They'll say, they'll shrug their shoulders, we don't know exactly, but we assume that it must be random and chaotic. Now, this is a materialist point of view that underscores many, many of the modern scientific thinking and thinkers. Somehow, over the last 100 years or so, the scientific community have become increasingly materialistic to a point. But there has been a change, a radical change. because modern physics, which is underlying every other scientific discipline, including biology, will indicate something a little bit different. It'll indicate the presence of an observer and observing consciousness. That's what it indicates. And that is much more acceptable than to say God. That's all right. That may be as it is. The yogic philosophy that is epitomized by the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, said in these pithy statements, pithy aphorisms, are more or less atheistic. The emphasis is not at all on God. And its twin philosophy, Sankhya, is pretty much atheistic. But both of them recognize the necessity and the reality of some entity that witnesses and doesn't change, a seer that is pure intelligence. And so these Patanjali Yoga Sutras are there to be accompanied by a living book called a teacher who will expand on each of these pithy aphorisms. But if a teacher tells you time is money and leaves it at that and discusses it thoroughly for 2, 3, 4 hours, then simply by saying time is money, you remember everything that was ever discussed under that subject. And so these aphoristic ways of teaching, and even the prose style and poetry style of the Upanishads, are in that kind of commentary style that will trigger off a memory of everything you ever discussed and lead you to a meditative position that reflects deeply on these things. And so the Patanjali Yoga Sutras is set out in a number of chapters. The last one is, according to the book, which is there, Raja Yoga, is translated as independence. That is, that this entity that is a witnessing entity that is called Purusha, and there are many Purushas according to this philosophy. So as an individual is, there's a Purusha. The Sankhya's and the yogis had the generosity to, particularly the Sankhya's, the yogis followed it, to put nature under one umbrella term. There is only one nature, and all the diversity that we see within it can be emanated or manifested from this one entity. But they didn't have enough generosity to put the Purusha under one thing. It was left to Vedanta to do that and call it Atman, also using the term Purusha, the indweller of a city, but the one that's pervading everywhere. So if you understand that there is a purpose to discover this Purusha, and by giving these pithy sayings, you can discover it. By these sayings that can be reflected on and that can be contemplated on and led to a position of a unity of experience or an isolation called independence, also called freedom, also called isolation, kaivalya. Isolating from the confusion, I am the body and mind. Supposing you're able to understand that the body didn't start off as a body. There was a precedent for it. There was a gathering of forces and energies and materials. And it all came in a subtle way. And you trace that back to a creative mind. And the first issue from it would be a kind of ethereal entity, very, very subtle. We call it agasha, the thing really that has a characteristic of space, something that is, and yet not to be defined. That's how subtle it is. We can put it like that. It's responsible for all sounds and all ears that catch. That kind of thing. You can put that at its end point. At its beginning point, of course, that bifurcation doesn't occur. It occurs in a subtle way that if you have space, you don't have unoccupied space, you have a teeming. And you can call all these creative entities that combine and recombine, what we call tanmatras, You can call them as fields. Now, what is a field? A field is an undefined area full of energetic points, bubbling and teeming. They're called virtual particles coming from some kind of vacuum which is not actually empty. But when you look at it, when you measure it, you won't find anything. You just find emptiness. No sound as such goes from there because there's as much of vacuum as you can ever imagine. And so that is what is called akasha, and that combines and recombines in certain proportions. And you get vayu, responsible for all pressures and all skins that catch it. It means dispersions and coming under contact, and contact coming under pressure, and pressure, that is called gravitational pressure, then on space, teeming with these energetic particles, these virtual particles, naturally produces by pressure and the energetic movement of it, kinetic energy, comes out as radiation and heat, Agni. And this is responsible for all colors, all forms, all eyes that see. And then that comes into electromagnetism. It settles down into, ultimately, the plasma of this primordial world and comes in as solid magnetic thing, iron, for example. This is called Prithivi. Api, water, and Prithivi. Not literally like that. And Api responsible for all tastes and all tongues that experience it. And Prithivi, all smells, all scents, and all noses that catch it. This combination and recombination comes as what we have here. And at our point of reception, we see that this Prithivi is earth, and literally earth is the provider of all the material that makes the body, all the food. It gives us nourishing, a source of nourishment, and we munch and crunch on its produce, its fruit, and that is today's body. The molecular body made from cells is made from food. Supposing we're able to understand that fully and register it in this way, what becomes of the complication, the obstacle in the way of I and mine? It's gone. Immediately it's gone. Registering it as nothing but food, it's gone. All that pride is gone. All that attachment to the body is gone. Now, supposing we were able to extend that experience to all others. Every being that has an embodied entity and has this attachment to this body that is behind this wish to survive, every being is just made from food. And behind that food, we find all the other combinations going back to cosmic mind. This is the various series of tattvas or elements that Sankhya philosophy proposes, and yoga comes across the same thing. And so what we call nature is really an unfolding process into what we find here and now. But of course, biological evolution takes it in a more detailed way. It takes us over some billions of years. We know that this Earth is about 4.5 billion years, let's say 4.3 to 4.5 billion years, human years, not divine years. And we know that the tiniest, simplest form of life was present not so long after this formation. This is called bacteria. Small entities, probably half a micron, that is, a micron is a thousandth of a millimeter. If it's rod-shaped, it's half a micron by 1 micron. All living and highly complex, and inside something called a DNA. And that DNA we carry biologically ourselves. And the progression from the one to the other is essentially what is called biological evolution. But when you ask a biologist, how does this work? How does a great selection take place because the population of beings is so huge that there has to be some mechanism whereby a select number survive all the vicissitudes and obstacles that are in the way that nature presents itself with. And so therefore, the fittest will survive. Fittest does not mean the healthiest. Fittest does not mean the more advantaged. It means it is fit for that circumstance. And it comes down then to two things: struggle to exist and survive, and the selection that takes place to enable a procreation of the species. Now, these two directives, the struggle to survive and this sex selection, has been called by the great 19th century mystic Sri Ramakrishna lust and greed. He puts it in a funny way as woman and gold or man and gold, but it's lust and greed, the two essential genetic directives that drive this evolution. So we all agree. We agree with Charles Darwin, who, along with Wallace, brought these ideas out in his book, this great treatise, Origin of the Species, or he was emphasizing the descent, really. So a common descent. And we wouldn't argue, and scientific evidence proves, that certainly we have things in common. All species have this common nucleus, this structure, this protein structure called deoxyribonucleic acid, a remarkable thing. You take a small hair from here, upper part of the cheek, not normally visible. You chop it into 1 million pieces, you take one, and right there with an electron microscope, you can see what is the nucleus of the cell, and you can see this entwined structure discovered by Crick and Watson. And there it was, this structure, coiled up structure. We might call it kundali, a coiled up thing. The yogic language for it is that. That means all your potential is there, containing something like 100,000 coded messages and sequences of base pairs that determines a genetic code for you and all creatures and gives rise to specific life forms, whether it's from humans to hamsters or to the hibiscus flower. All of that is a commonality. So the human genome, as it is called, will contain about 3 billion DNA base of these base pairs. It's packed into 23 pairs of chromosomes for the human being, and a total overall of 46 chromosomes. And then early on, it was discovered that proteins were stored in that genetic code. They thought that every part of the genetic code was really associated with a protein, but we discovered when we did a project, when there was a project to discover what is the human genome, we discovered disappointingly that it wasn't so. Small number. In fact, rice has more of the genomes than we do. So that means then that about 85% of our DNA we share with a mouse, for example, and 41% with a banana. It probably explains why I eat so many bananas. So there's a remarkable thing. If you put this DNA code, unravel it, and stretch it end to end, it'll cover many, many kilometers. The information, coded information there, will fill many, many libraries. And this is the extent, just in a one small cell. And it also contains your uniqueness, inherited uniqueness. Now, all of this is very interesting, but when you talk of survival and when you talk of sex selection, all of this doesn't explain why it is there. The natural selection is a fact, but doesn't explain why it is there. And Charles Darwin saw what unnatural selection looks like. We know how to breed horses, to breed dogs. All that is deliberate. We can make brand new versions of this, improved species. But how to make a brand new species? That's a difficult thing. And so that remains something of a mystery. We can only infer that because of the common DNA, there was just a diversification that is described as a tree. So branch here and branch there and so on. And Charles Darwin had several difficulties in his own mind. Some objections about his own theory came about. If we don't find the evidence of this gradual change in the fossil record, then maybe this will be a nail in our coffin. Can there be such a thing? But he had an answer for it also. It wasn't, we weren't looking for gradual changes in that way, although they may well be there. We're looking for the branches, indications of the branches. So he devised something like a tree. And we can surely think, when that is described, of our own Ashwata tree described in the Katha Upanishad and also the Bhagavad Gita, describing the whole of the universe as something like a tree with branches above, or roots above and branches below. There's this interesting shloka, or I should say sutra, in this chapter, last chapter on independence. It's the second sutra. And it says that the change into another species is by the infilling of nature. The change into another species is by the infilling of nature. Nowhere have we mentioned this so far in Darwin's idea about evolution. But this now gives a kind of purpose. The commentary goes like this. Patanjali has advanced the proposition that the powers mentioned previously in the previous stanza come by birth, sometimes by chemical means or through modification. This is mentioned in the first sutra. He also admits that this body can be kept for any length of time. Now he goes on to state what is the cause of the change of the body into another species. Not just the human body, but any body. What is the cause of this change? In other words, what is the cause of evolution? And he's writing this, don't forget, 1896. So he says, this is done by the filling in of nature. This is his commentary. Now, it's not his commentary alone. This commentary is derived from Vyasa and Vachaspati's gloss on it, all the ancient commentators on this sutra. So this is not his idea. He's bringing this up. This is the ancient idea of all the yogis and the commentators who understood this process of change. And so he says this is done by the filling in of nature, which he explains in the next aphorism. He puts it like this. Nimittam apraya jakam. Good and bad deeds are not the direct causes in the transformations of nature. Now, let us see what we mean by good and bad deeds. Of course, only in the human do we find any moral codes or values. You can't teach morality to a crocodile. Its nature is to survive and bite, and it's done successfully for thousands upon thousands upon thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. It is the most successful of all the reptilian species. It has survived all kinds of things and has adapted itself to that. The cold-blooded animal that reserves its energy and sits quietly most of the time, but any slight movement and those jaws will snap. And probably in my next life I'll be a crocodile because I like pulling people's legs. But you see, this crocodile, you can't teach it, look, it's wrong to bite. Its nature is to bite. It's exactly right for it to bite. But its biting habit, whether good or bad, that's not the direct cause in its transformation. And on the moral front, good and bad deeds done by us are not the cause of transformations either. What is the cause of transformations? They act as breakers of obstacles. Goodness, truth, beauty, love, nobility, peacefulness, generosity, selflessness, all come under the heading of what we call sattva, one of the three great evolutionary forces that drive this evolution. But drives it not in an advancing way, but in a negative way, is removing an obstacle. So it says, they act as breakers of obstacles to the evolutions of nature. Then he says, and he's inserting a commentary into the sutras, and in fact it's the standard commentary of the commentators. As a farmer breaks the obstacles to the course of water, which then runs down by its own nature. Now this running down is called Waddington's trough in modern biology language, in a particular branch of it, which seems to be new for many people, but is actually quite old, is a branch called epigenetics. And this Waddington's trough is there. In other words, it's as if something is rolling downhill in a series of troughs, or in one particular trough, and it requires something to pull it on the one side, and gravity will just drop it on the other. And it'll land somewhere. But the point is, it's not landing randomly. There's a direction to it, because there's only one thing it's running into. So it's exactly the same concept. There is a purpose now. Not just a random, haphazard thing. A purpose is there. And I'm going to describe it in two ways. Because water is mentioned, let's pick this up, and then we'll continue the commentary. So we can imagine now a farmer's field, and you won't just let water into it all of a sudden. You'll let water into it when it's required. So you're holding the water back by means of, you have established canals, and you have a block in between. And in order to direct the water into the one field, you remove the block or the obstacle, and the water runs by itself. You didn't have to go and take teaspoons of it and put it on the other side. Now I'm going to give you a much grander example. In Zimbabwe, we have something called Kariba Dam. It is, I think, the largest man-made lake in the world, and there's a big dam wall which is holding it back at its narrowest exit. And then it goes into the Zambezi River. It's all on the Zambezi River. When they established it first, they had to have an operation called Operation Noah, where they had to rescue all the animals. They're flooding this valley. And they had to relocate the inhabitants of the valley. China is doing the same thing. A colossal hydroelectric project is being established. A vast amount of water is just being held back. But of course, occasionally the dam will get full, or occasionally it's required downhill and the pressure has to be relieved. And so the gates are opened and it's spectacular. The water goes like an immense waterfall and shoots out with such huge pressure that over the years is threatening to make an undermining of the dam wall itself at its foundations, making such a deep hollow. So you see, supposing this vast lake, when I say vast, you gotta look out and you can't see the horizon, or you can't see land at the end of the horizon. In other words, it's something like looking out to sea. Such a vast area it is. You can't transfer it using a teaspoon. Take a teaspoon and transfer it. You'll be there for not just many years, but many lifetimes. What was your purpose? I want to get water to this side. What did you do? Well, I'm only one person and I only have a teaspoon. All right, good luck. It's much easier to open the gates. When you open the gates, the water flows through by itself. So that's indicating something. There is a foundation to all of this unfolding that wants to be released. And when an obstacle gets removed, it gets released. And this is the yogic idea of evolution. It establishes a purpose, it establishes an origin, it establishes a flow, and it establishes a mechanism because the drive to get back to its own origin is there. So, the water for irrigation of fields, says the commentary, is already in the canal. You don't have to go and fetch it. Lord, please come here, please come there. Lord, please give me your grace. No, the water is already there, waiting to flow. So the water is already in the canal, only shut in by gates. And the farmer opens these gates and the water flows in by itself, by the law of gravitation. So all progress and power are already in every man without struggling. You don't have to make any effort to get it, only to remove the obstacles. That's all. And sattvic behavior, pure behavior, has the capacity to remove the obstacles. But antisocial behavior, selfish behavior, behavior driven by egoism or by laziness and ignorance, it puts a blockage there. Only it is barred and prevented from taking its proper course. If anyone can take the bar off hidden, rushes nature, and then the man attains the powers which are his already, and those we call wicked become saints. As soon as the bar is broken and nature rushes in, it is nature that is driving us towards perfection. Perfection is our inherent instinct, our inherent drive. We can't avoid it. Only it's steered and interpreted in wrong ways or different ways. We think that maybe perfection will be physical perfection, or perfection will be cultural perfection, or perfection will be even moral perfection, or doing good works, or something of that nature. No, not at all. Perfection is already in you and is driving you toward this, and it's the very reason why you want to exist, and you want to struggle, and you want to continue it. It's only a misunderstanding. As soon as you understand, I don't have to do any of those things. I can simply work on removing the obstacles. Then this flows through by itself. Can't avoid it. Now in spiritual healing, that also happens. Jesus stands there 2,000 years ago, and a blind man sees, and a lame man walks, and a dead man wakes. How is it all that possible? Because he had the capacity, standing from the advantage of cosmic mind itself, to see the perfection already there. Seeing that perfection there, it came through, and all the physical defects were automatically corrected. The flow rushed through. And so, eventually, she, that is nature, will bring everyone there. All these practices and struggles to become religious are only negative work to take off the bars and open the doors to that perfection, which is our birthright, our nature. It is our own nature. It's not some foreign nature. Now he goes on to say, today the evolution theory, that's even in his day, of course, Darwinian evolution was already there from the 1850s, 1860s already. Today the evolution theory of the ancient yogis will be better understood in the light of modern research. Now, in his day, modern research was one thing. In our day, modern research is another. Because with the discovery of the genetic component of this, what do you call Mendelian genetics, that saw that there was certain inherited characteristics from this. Darwin suggested it, but he had no idea how it worked. And that was a great advance. But then there were two schools of thought. Yes, it can happen with seeds and plants, but not with human beings. And so there was something like a hold on that, and called Weismann's barrier. And that hold really developed into the popular edition of evolutionary biology called the modern synthesis. It was Julian Huxley, the Huxley family. Thomas Huxley was the person who suggested that our evolution came from primates and pushed that. Darwin didn't do it. It was Thomas Huxley, his bulldog, that did it. Then Julian Huxley, the great botanist or biologist, he then suggests that there should be a modern synthesis. He now suggests that it is to do with more the genetic mutations, genetic drift. It is all to do with that. And so in the 1970s, the greatest champion of that was a biologist called Richard Dawkins, who happened to be a great, great champion of neo-atheism. Why neo-atheism? New atheism, because he saw in this Darwinianism, and sees today, of course, that it is all chance that is driving things, random mutations. Now, the modern view derived from physiology is very different from that. First of all, there's great evidence that there is no randomness, none whatsoever, that any randomness is catered for. And that second thing is that evolution is slow and progressive. One of Darwin's greatest difficulties was what he called the abominable mystery. Abominable mystery was, he thought that evolution was a slow process over time, because it was a chain of causal events happening completely naturally, with no direction, and also to some extent, therefore, had to be as a result of a certain element of chance, a certain reaction to the environment, which resulted in some mutation, but it would be very slow. He couldn't understand why, in the Cretaceous period, about 100 million years ago only, that all of a sudden there were flowering plants, from seed-derived plants like conifers and so on. All of a sudden, from seemingly nowhere, the evidence showed flowering plants, the most successful ever. Where did it come from? All of a sudden it happened. And then we find a period in the geological history where there was a great surge. And so some modern biologists have suggested, a man called Gould was one of them, that there is punctuated equilibrium, that this evolution is not necessarily slow. Now we can ask this question from this point of view of this ancient view of evolution. Why should it be fast and slow? Why should it accommodate according to its needs, so to speak? So I'm going to come back now to the concept of water and what we might call flow evolution. Supposing you have a stream, let us say it develops as a spring from the mountains, and it goes through its valleys, it obeys the law of gravity, and a tiny stream, maybe 1-2 feet wide, but as it goes down, it gathers momentum, and with it, it gathers also water, ice developed into water, and it goes down, it comes into a valley. You can immediately know that I'm describing the holy Ganga river. And as it goes on, it increases, and it becomes the source of life everywhere. And fish start swimming in it, and fishermen start fishing in it. And it gives nourishment and sustenance to the banks and flora and fauna around it. And animals and birds come to drink by it. and it's flowing extremely swiftly so that it gets past the mouth of the Ganga and comes Gangotri, and then eventually, still fast flowing, comes to that area called Rishikesh and continues on its way to Haridwar and so on. Still flowing extremely swiftly and increasingly broad. So, where is this river destined? It wants to get into the ocean. That really, incidentally, makes every ocean sacred. Because if we think the Ganga River is sacred, then when we go to the local sea, say off the coast of Ireland, please be assured that the Ganga has flowed into it. It's also sacred. But all water is sacred because water is life. Without water, there's no life. That's our organic arrangement. Now, there will be obstacles on the way. But water is a fluid thing, naturally, that's its nature. It finds the easiest and quickest path round. But you can see there's a surge on it. It wants to move. There's a momentum. You can't stop it. It's already there. It wants to unfold. It wants to urge itself forward. Now, in some places, it may get delayed. It may get hooked up in a whirlpool. It may take a divergent path because there may be rocks in the way, or there may be cliffs, or there may be S-bends due to the erosion that it has made, or there may be an avalanche or a landslide. But rest assured, it'll find its way, either as a stream or a river or whatever it is. You can't avoid it. And so if this perfection is something like a flow, it will find its way. And it may be delayed, of course, but in it will be variation. In it will be new pathways. We might call that speciation. All of that will be a struggle toward perfection, as it were. And all of that will have a direction and a purpose, a particular flow, and you cannot stop the flow. And you can try to dam it, but if you want water beyond that barrier, you have to remove it. And water will flow by itself. You don't have to go and fetch it. So we might call this the flow theory of evolution. And this is the ancient idea of it. Now he goes on, and yet he says, the theory of the yogis is a better explanation than those modern evolutionists of his day. And don't forget, Neo-Darwinism has made a divergency away from Darwin's original idea, because they have emphasized, they think that the synthesis of this genetic aspect will solve the problems, and they put it down to the genome as interpreted by this DNA inside the cell. Now, this DNA has to be unfolded and it can be controlled. You can't replace it, but this science of epigenetics says that we can deliberately and consciously change our behavior, because we can put locks and bars on this DNA. We can, around the DNA, there's a network, and we can put stop and go on it so that we can modify its behavior. No fatalism in it. We are the determinants of our own fate. And this is what epigenetics has shown us. The original behavioral evolution was by Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. And he felt that behaviors could be inherited. Ultimately, he was relegated to ridicule, unfortunately. But the inheritance was accepted by Darwin. It was taken for granted that that has to be so. And epigenetics has discovered the mechanism of how it is. Now, who rules the cell then? if you make any mistake in your reproduction of proteins in the cells, are you doomed to get a mutation, and from those random mutations, most of which will be damaging? Does that mean that randomly, by chance, you'll make a different species, denying this flow theory of evolution? No, because all that does is it forms the architecture of the cell. And even if you extract from the cell that DNA and put it in a petri dish and give it all the nutrients you want, it'll remain there for 1,000 years and not do anything. It won't do a single thing. And so what is doing it? What is instructing it? What is correcting it? We don't know precisely. When I say we, I mean not me or anything, but the microbiologists will come to this conclusion. The whole cell is responsible. A vast network of cooperative entities within the cell makes a plan B, a plan C, a plan D, a corrective thing, and very occasionally a mistake gets out. And any mistake that gets out would be to the detriment of our species. It doesn't advance our evolution at all. So this two aspects of it, this randomness aspect and this rapidity of the evolutionary process, are two key pillars of the neo-Darwinian evolution, and they have shown to be not true. And the third component that I've mentioned is that the DNA is not the driving force, is not the error force, is not the correcting force. DNA is being instructed. It has a part to play, no doubt. It plays a part in heredity, and principally, though, making proteins. But what proteins should it make? It seems the whole cell is a community that is involved in the cell's survival. And the community of cells that we call human body is all down to the cell itself. What a wonderful thing. What an amazing thing. No wonder some people think it is designed. And people like Richard Dawkins will say it appears to be designed. And then a skeptic might say, if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it probably is a duck. But the difficulty with design is, this is not here in this evolutionary theory of the ancient yogis. Why not? Well, just from a metaphysical or theological point of view, an intelligent designer is not on the table. Supposing the Lord and myself, being intimate partners and companions, come to an insurmountable river, and I say, Lord, will you now design and make a bridge for us to cross over? Won't the Lord laugh at me? He says, my dear child, in an instant we can be across. There's no need for a design, no need for a bridge. So that's the point. And then you see a created designer will require something made from nothing. Ex nihilo is the expression, and that is always a difficult thing. What this is saying is, no, the whole totality is the flow. And when it reaches the ocean, when it transcends nature itself, when it's come to its end, and then, of course, at that point, there is a position where nothing else is there. This is the isolation which is there. We have found our complete freedom. No more obstacles, no more deviations, no more travels, no more bends, no more twists. So he says, the two causes of evolution advanced by the moderns in those days, that is, sexual selection and survival of the fittest, are inadequate. Suppose human knowledge to have advanced so much as to eliminate competition both from the function of acquiring physical sustenance and of acquiring a mate, something that first world countries have almost come across, then according to the moderns, human progress will stop and the race will die. The result of this theory is to furnish every oppressor with the argument to calm the qualm of conscience. And this is way, way before the two world wars and the Second World War, where this ethnic theories that were based on Darwinian concepts, distorted Darwinian concepts, have come out. This ethnic cleansing aspect, an understanding of a superior, genetically superior race comes out. Men are not lacking, he says, who, posing as philosophers, want to kill out all wicked and incompetent persons. They are, of course, the only judges of competency. And at its extreme, we see eugenetics, or eugenics, I should say, where people who are in some way defective are simply eliminated. This is what the Nazis were doing in the Second World War, and thus preserved the human race. But the great ancient evolutionist Patanjali declares that the true secret of evolution is the manifestation of the perfection which is already in every being. That this perfection has been barred and the infinite tide behind is struggling to express itself. These struggles and competitions are but the results of our ignorance. Because we do not know the proper way to unlock the gate and let the water in. What a beautiful, beautiful way of describing spiritual practice. You're removing obstacles. It is the reason why Hindus, before they pray to anybody or do anything, they prostrate and make a salutation and a prayer to Ganesha, the removal of all the obstacles. This infinite tide behind must express itself. Must express itself. It is the cause of all manifestation. Competition for life or self-gratification are only momentary, unnecessary, extraneous efforts caused by ignorance. If you think that these are the essential components and ingredients that will enhance evolution, what he's saying is they won't. Only taking off the obstacles will enhance the evolutionary process. Even when all competition has ceased, this perfect nature behind will make us go forward until everyone has become perfect. What a positive message. Therefore, there's no reason to believe that competition is necessary. Or at least competition is necessary to progress. In the animal, the man was suppressed, but as soon as the door was opened, out rushed man. We were once primates, probably on the shores, on an island in the shores of Africa. And we learned to swim and communicate. And we learned to develop the brain and our intelligence. And we stood upright in order to wade through the waters. And we lost our hair, we lost our fur in order to be more hydro-friendly. It's only a theory called the aquatic ape, by the way, by a lady called Elaine Morgan. But certainly it shows that there's a transition period where this inherent flow wants to flow out by itself. And so in man, there is the potential God, kept in by the locks and bars of ignorance. When knowledge breaks these bars, that God becomes manifest. What a wonderful view, then, of the evolutionary process. At the very end, of course, and it's something that I have read out a number of times before, but it is absolutely beautiful. So the last of Patanjali's sutras is that the resolution in the inverse order of the qualities, bereft of any motive of action for the Purusha, is kaivalya, this isolation, or discovery, or it is the establishment of the power of knowledge in its own nature. Swami Vivekananda gives us beautiful commentary. And this is in direct antithesis to Darwin's Victorian view that nature is raw, that nature is cruel, that nature is clutching, that nature is struggling, that we have to combat it. Nature's task is done. This unselfish task done when we release that final thing, when we remove the man obstacle and God comes out. This unselfish task which our sweet nurse, not like a tiger attacking us, nature had imposed upon herself. She, on herself, nobody else, not a cruel joke on you or me, she gently took the self-forgetting soul by the hand. We are suffering from self-forgetfulness, that's all. And showed him all the experiences in the universe, all manifestations, bringing him higher and higher through various bodies. This is our view of evolution. Till his lost glory came back, and he remembered his own nature. Then the kind mother went back the same way she came for others who also have lost their way in the trackless desert of life. And thus is she working without beginning and without end. And thus, through pleasure and pain, through good and evil, you might say through struggle, the infinite river of souls is flowing into the ocean of perfection of self-realization. And he finishes off with this wonderful prayer that is suitable for us ourselves to finish off with. Glory unto those who have realized their own nature. May their blessings be on us all. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.